Hi everybody, this is Adina and I'm going to give you a lecture today that I hope will help you to write your paper about the play Macbeth by William Shakespeare. So I'm going to explain a few things, give you a little historical background on the play, maybe we'll read some passages together, and hopefully you'll learn something, and hopefully I will be able to express myself coherently in this new format on the web. So I just want to, first of all, tell you a little bit about my goal here. You're going to have to write an essay on Macbeth. That's a standard 1,000-word humanities department style essay in the MLA format using 3 passages from the text. You are going to have to come up with a thesis. So that means you have to come up with a statement that's an analytical statement about the play. And you want to tell the reader something. You assume the reader has read Macbeth, that you notice that's a pattern in the play, and you want to discuss the meaning of the play for you via that thesis statement. So you're going to do a close reading of the text, a close reading of some of the passages in the text, and hopefully you're going to enlighten your reader and teach him or her something new about the play. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of Macbeth and the background. I'm also going to talk about the Elizabethan worldview and the idea in the Renaissance of the great chain of being, which hopefully you're already familiar with from some discussions and some readings. I'm also going to talk about good and evil in the tragedy of Macbeth and what that means. And I might even compare it with Homer's Odyssey a little bit. And I'm going to talk about the meaning of what does it mean to be human in this play, Macbeth. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And hopefully this will give you some ideas of what you could use for your paper. So first of all, Macbeth was written in the early 1600s. By this time, Queen Elizabeth was dead. She had been a hugely popular queen. She had really united the country against the Spanish. She had helped to defeat the Spanish Armada. England was at a huge time of flowering, of poetry, literature, painting, music. Everything was really going well. They were very, very powerful. They had a powerful navy. Many people have compared Elizabethan England to Athens in the 5th century BC with the kind of political power and the kind of cultural flowering that they experienced. So Queen Elizabeth had died, and she was the virgin queen, allegedly. She had no direct descendants or heirs. So the throne passed on to the son of her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. And Elizabeth had had Mary executed. I've been to the place where she was executed in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the castle. And her son James, who was James I and VI. He was the 6th king of Scotland named James, but he's the 1st king of England named James. So he was called James I, and he was the first king to rule over both Scotland and England. So the English were very, very interested in Scotland during this time. They're like, who is this guy? He comes from Scotland. His mom was Scottish. What's Scotland? You know, we thought it was a bunch of Picts jumping around wearing blue. So Shakespeare was kind of turned on by that idea also. And when Macbeth was written, it began to be referred to as the Scottish play. And even today, there's a lot of superstition about Macbeth. Actors don't like to say the name of the play when they're in it because they might have some kind of bad luck. They might some scenery might fall on them, or they might fall over. You know, the actors are very superstitious, so they don't say Macbeth. They say the Scottish play. So Shakespeare started writing this play. He found this very exciting, very gory history of Scotland that he was reading. That had been put out at the time, and everyone really enjoyed reading it. And there was a really exciting story of treachery in the 11th century in Scotland. And in this story, there was a king called Duncan. And Duncan was very, very inept. He was a bad king, and he was also very cruel and bloody. So he was overthrown by his thanes, and thanes are, as you know, like vassals. They're the lords, they're the sort of warlords in the feudal society of 11th century. So Macbeth and Banquo were actually the good guys. They overthrew the inept and cruel King Duncan in real life. Macbeth then became king. He didn't have any children, and so Banquo, who was sort of his co-leader, his children became kings. And in fact, allegedly, James I is a direct descendant of Banquo, the Thane Banquo. And there's a scene in Macbeth, which some people think Shakespeare didn't even write, where he sees this vision of all of these kings, this line of kings going back to Banquo and coming down to James I. But the first question we have to ask here is, why would Shakespeare change the story? Why would he change it from a benevolent and from an evil, inept, and cruel King Duncan in reality to a benevolent and kind Duncan who is overthrown by Macbeth, who then becomes very bloodthirsty? Macbeth acting on his own, not with Banquo. So there are two very, very important changes here. One is that Duncan is now a nice guy. And we even hear, oh gosh, where's my Macbeth book? Oh, here it is. Okay. So we even hear when Macbeth is looking he's thinking about how he's not going to kill Duncan. He's giving the reasons why. And he says he's here in double trust. This is Act 1, Scene 7. First, as I am his kinsman and his subject, strong both against a deed, then is his host, who should against his murderer shut the door, not bear the knife myself. Besides, this Duncan hath borne his faculties so meek, hath been so clear in his great office, that his virtues will plead like angels, trumpet-tongued, against the deep damnation of his taking off. So, in this play, Macbeth is saying, oh my gosh, Duncan is such a nice guy. He's borne his office so well. So why did Shakespeare change it? So that it was not a evil, creepy Duncan, but a benevolent, kind Duncan. And why did he change it so that Macbeth is now acting on his own and not telling Banquo anything? Banquo knows that his sons are going to be kings, but he doesn't know anything else. Now, the other thing we want to look at is this interest, this obsession with witches. The witches are in many ways the stars of the play. And I want to warn you guys right now, many people make the grievous mistake when they're writing their paper. They'll say, oh, if it hadn't been for the witches, it's all the witches' fault. If Macbeth hadn't met the witches, none of this would have happened. Now, you have got to get away from that idea. That's like saying, if only I hadn't have bought a Cadillac, I wouldn't have had to pay all this money for my transmission. There's no point in saying that, because I did buy a Cadillac. And this play is about the Cadillac, and it's about the transmission. So if you start saying something like, if only the witches weren't there, then he wouldn't have done this stuff, you're not writing about Macbeth. You're writing about some hypothetical play that you've made up in your mind where there's no witches. Okay, and the fact is the witches are central. So if you want to write about the witches, don't say, oh, if only the witches had never come into the story. That's just pointless. So, in interest in witches, first of all, James I was obsessed with witches. He was very superstitious. He had burned a large number of women at the stake, suggesting that they were women. If anything bad happened to him, if something fell off the bookshelf, he'd be like, oh, the witches, there are witches around. So he was really into witches. And he actually asked Shakespeare to include some witches. He thought that might be kind of cool, play about witches. Kind of exciting, it's like a horror movie now. Makes it very, very interesting, very exciting. But Shakespeare, what he does is he takes the witches and he creates something more than just some creepy supernatural weirdos. That's what they appear to be on the surface, but they're very, very, very powerful. And if you just see them as kind of random troublemakers, then your paper's going to be very shallow, I think.